There are lots of people who do what I do, who give advice online. What's the role of influencers and what's the role of how people can make financial decisions in a way where they have to decide who they can trust, who they should focus on, what to believe, and what can advisors do who want to be able to use things like the media and online influencers to actually make a better impact on the world around them? We'll be talking to an expert about that today. This is Make Better Wealth Decisions, a podcast about financial blind spots, decision making, and how the reality of higher rates, global tensions, and tariff instability impact your investments. I'm your host, John De Goey, a portfolio manager with Design Securities in Toronto. This week, my guest is Mike Schwartz. He is the co-founder and lead instructor at Basis Point Media, where he helps financial advisors create engaging videos and drive real business growth without the fluff. Mike, welcome.
Thanks, John.
This is going to be a fun conversation because you and I do some work together and you help me put out videos and various things that are related to, but nonetheless separate from the podcast. And so I have to be careful that I don't want this to be a podcast audit. I want you to see if you can help us maybe drive some lessons for listeners. The podcast that I host is called Make Better Wealth Decisions. It's about financial decision making, and that's where I want to focus our conversation. So I know that you oftentimes write about and talk about helping financial advisors focus on making smarter content decisions. So with me, I'm trying to get listeners to make better wealth decisions. You're trying to get advisors to make better content decisions. So that's an important distinction. You've got a fascinating background, and maybe just give us maybe 30 or 40 seconds about your background before we get into the questions.
I started out as a rookie advisor at a big 5-bank wealth management firm. Moved from there to the futures and options desk. I was there for just under 10 years total. Left and have been basically a consultant ever since. Have a few sort of failed business ideas kind of under my belt. And the latest endeavor being this advisor video boot camp that Preet and I run together. You know, Preet, you've had him on. You know, in the last few years, a lot of fascination and a lot of work that I've done around this like influencer space. So I started off in finance, but I kind of through consulting found the influencer space, which has grown considerably in the last few years with the advent of YouTube and social media and continues to blow up. So that's an extremely short version of it, but I know you wanted to talk about a couple of things specifically. So
let's do that. That's actually a good segue to my first question, which is the role of influencers. In 2025, a lot of people get their information from more disparate sources than ever before. And one of the things that people who are accredited advisors are constantly butting up against is the role of influencers, people who put out videos and whatnot, who don't necessarily have credentials. So I'm wondering what your comments are with regard to influencers, as financial influencers, but also their role and what people should be making of them.
Sure, that's a great question. And I think when you think about, you know, this idea of an influencer or somebody who is able to basically, let's call it build trust at scale, right? Like that's basically what you're doing. If you look at, you know, not to go into a super deep history lesson, but for the majority of human history, we haven't had this ability to build trust at scale, right? Trust is basically built on a one-to-one or a one-to-small group basis until you get to, you know, sort of like the mid 1400s, Gutenberg invents the printing press, and all of a sudden you can distribute your ideas in text format. You can do that at scale. So that's like a huge moment in human history where we go from where we're sort of physiologically built to, you know, only trust people that we know, that we see, that we can hear, that we spend time around. Now you can do it, you know, with the printing press, you can do it at scale. And then it's not until maybe the 1800s that the telegraph comes out, and now scale distribution of information is more about speed than it is about, you know, the written text. So the written text still has influence and people who write are able to distribute it, but now you have speed as part of the equation. Then you get to the 1900s where radio broadcasting becomes mass consumed. And now the voice is a component, right? So when you think about on a one-to-one basis, like a huge component of how we recognize people is not the written word, it's actually what they sound like. And babies early on, they recognize their parents' voice. Even though they don't know what they're saying, they know what their parents sound like. So that's a really key part to figuring out who we trust and who we already know and who we don't know. So radio broadcasting is huge, and this recognition of the voice is big. And then you go to the mid 1900s, and you've got TV. So not just the vocal, the auditory aspect. Now you can see the person who's talking, right? And you and I, we're on a podcast right now, or we're on a video call right now, and I can see your face. I can see your body language. I can tell if maybe you're getting a little bored with what I'm talking about, and I maybe need to switch it up a little bit. But being able to hear voice and see your face adds this extra level of trust building that is more like building trust in person than it is reading a book, right? It's a very, very powerful thing. And so we see this growth in the 50s of the influence of entertainers, TV personalities, and so on, right?
So that brings me to the bane of the existence of financial advisors who have spent their entire careers and have been trained to build trust on a one-on-one basis.
Yeah.
Is that we have other people who are not as accredited, who don't know as much about personal finance as we do, but they're building trust on scale.
Yes.
With scale.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, wait a minute. Everything that I've been taught was you have to sit across the kitchen table from Mr. and Mrs. Jones and help to understand their circumstances. It's all very micro. It's all very personal. And here comes these people who don't even have credentials coming along, and they put out a video and they get 50 or 100,000 views, and suddenly people are following them. And wait a minute, what am I? Am I chopped liver? Like I was taught that I have to do it on a very non-scalable basis, that it was very much person by person. So I guess the question is, what does that mean for the future when people who don't necessarily have credentials can build scale, when the people who have credentials are still working on a very micro one-on-one basis, predominantly?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the question is, you have to think from the perspective of what's the utility of scale for somebody who's working on a one-to-one basis, right? So is it your ability to find and attract new clients, in which case you need to figure out how to play in this space, right? Because what happened in the early 2000s, and this was really materially different from all of the technological advances that came before, was all of a sudden things were decentralized. So it used to be that if you were a broadcaster, you wanted to be on a TV show, you had to get approved by whoever owned the network and controlled things, right? So they were very particular about who would be allowed on radio, who would be allowed on TV. Now with decentralization, anybody can show up. So being able to build in a non-controlled, non-centralized way is a very, very new thing. And what influencers broadly are doing, or the way that they're successful, is they're extremely audience focused, right? So they really understand who their audience is and what makes them tick, because regardless of the information that they're giving them, whether it's good information, whether it's useful to that person or not, whether it's accurate or not, what they've done is they've been able to connect with their audience on more of an emotional level. So insofar as, their audience is able to sit and consume whatever it is they make and go, well, this person gets me. This person is speaking the way that I think. And that builds an incredible amount of trust. Now what happens after that has everything to do with the ethics of the influencer, right? So are they going to try to spoof this person into doing something that lines their pockets? But the thing to think about, if you're in this one-to-one trust building, you have skill there, and that's how you operate, is, okay, there is this opportunity to build something in this medium, whether it's to attract new clients or service existing clients, but you got to play the same game, right? You have to understand that this emotional connection is important. And what I see universally with advisors is, because there's so much of a sunk cost in all of the education and all of the time that they spend in the industry, is they are generally very product focused, right? Their focus is towards, okay, how do I sell this person into portfolio or into an insurance product or whatever it is? Not in a disingenuous way, but in a way that the end goal is to make a sale, right? Because I've spent all this time building this, but the goal of doing this was to monetize it. The problem with the monetization first approach to content is it's very obvious to the viewer when you're you're transactional, right? It's like whenever you see an ad, you know what an ad feels like, right? It's got a feel to it.
Right.
So we have to swap our feel from, okay, it's not about the transaction necessarily in every single piece of content that you make. It's about the trust building. And once you build the trust, the transaction comes very naturally.
This is now a bit of my personal confessional. I'm trying to find ways to be honest and forthright in what I do in my podcast. And I struggle about whether or not I should be focusing on financial planning solutions or product attributes, maybe not necessarily for a specific product, but maybe for an asset class and what role it plays in the portfolio. And then I have other people that are on that are journalists and academics and whatnot, people like yourself that are not necessarily affiliated with any company that's going to be trying to sell you anything. I'm just trying to educate people. And I'm wondering which way you think people should be if you're a podcaster and you want to genuinely help people make better wealth decisions. Should you focus on products? Should you focus on strategies? Should you focus on getting a background on the education and the latest research? Where do you go? Because to my mind, I want to do it all. And I don't know if maybe I should be focusing on different things.
I think, I always come back to the audience. And this is something that whenever I talk to anybody who's trying to do, frankly, anything with content on the internet. Recently, I was working with a very big influencer who's got about 2 million followers on Instagram and has a very loyal and dedicated audience. But people at some point, they go, well, can I make some money? We all have to pay our bills, right? Like, I don't think you have to apologize for having to pay your bills. But she's protective of this trust that she's built with her audience, that it's a very delicate process in thinking about, okay, how do we actually, maybe not within, one hard crank of the wheel, but maybe in a few slight turns of the wheel, can we actually create something that delivers value that this audience is willing to pay for? So understanding your audience and what they care about is the most important thing when you're trying to build an audience, right? We may have some things in our head that we're like, I want to talk about this. I have this experience here. I know that talking about this will be valuable. The problem is if you can't grab their attention and pull them in, you'll never get the opportunity to talk about the thing that you want to talk about. So it's about finding that emotional resonance. And that is really flipping around to the other side of the screen and going, well, what do these people care about? Net of what I could help them with. What do they care about? And how can I make that emotional connection so we can build trust and then I can talk in whatever direction I want to talk in?
Okay, so now that brings me to a different problem, which is on the one hand, engagement is critical. On the other hand, every once in a while, you will want to convey solutions to complex problems. And if you get too much into the weeds, how to solve this problem, you run the risk of losing engagement because people want something that's light and easily digestible and easy to understand. And if you're going to start doing technical stuff, that might be maybe a little bit too specialized. So I'm wondering about what you think would be a good way of threading that needle and finding the sweet spot in terms of maintaining engagement, but still adding value and not being pedantic and professorial and, oh, look at me. I want to genuinely help people. So how do you genuinely help people?
I think you have to go through this process of treating every piece of, let's just take YouTube as an example. Say you decide that based on the audience you're trying to reach, that YouTube is the medium that you want to post videos on, right? And I think part of the challenge is I can make short videos, I can make long videos, I can make highly produced videos, I can make a video with my phone. Like, there's a lot of directions that I can go in. But what's important, I think, is to approach it from the perspective, as you're building and trying to find your audience, approach it from the perspective of every video is a bit of an experiment, right? It's an experiment with respect to who shows up, who engages, what resonates, and understanding that the broader the topic, and when I say broad, what I mean is the more widely applicable the topic is from an emotional perspective. If you look at videos that go viral, for an example, they tend to be the topics that are broadly relevant to people. Something about President Trump that's well put together for the medium might go viral, right? I remember there's a period of time that I used to get these videos on YouTube and it triggered my fear of heights. Right. So it would have been a video where somebody was standing at the top of a cliff. And what's happening is this emotional connection that's happening with me is like, oh my God, are they going to fall off the cliff? Like it makes me afraid to watch that. And that kind of stuff really connects with people. And that's a broad human emotion, right? Like fear is a really important thing that connects with an audience. So you kind of think of it, the way I describe it is like like you're playing a game of Battleship, right? So in Battleship, you can't see the other player's board and you're sort of firing these shots across to see where you get a hit and where you don't. And the biggest mistake in Battleship is to keep shooting at the same area, right? And, not getting a hit and wondering why you're not getting a hit. The best thing to do is say, by some measure, whether it's thematically or whether it's by, your audience's pain point or topic or whatever, try to create a distributed approach to shooting your rockets over and seeing what hits and what doesn't, right? So if you make a broad video about Trump and tariffs and it does well, that's evidence that there's an audience there that's willing to listen to that from you. But if you make a super specific topic over here that just doesn't hit, it doesn't mean that it's not relevant. It just means you haven't hit that critical mass yet, where there's a subset of the audience that cares about it. So it is challenging, but you have to look at the whole thing as this ongoing experiment until you build an audience that wants to listen to the things that you want to talk about.
So one of the things that I've heard you talk about and I've seen you write about is that you should use structure to hold curiosity and to avoid the trap of over-investing in content that isn't resonating. And that, frankly, is my fear. I'm putting out content, and allow me to be a little bit autobiographical here. The two subject matters that I would like to be able to talk on in greater detail are the two subject matters that I explore in my two most recent books. So in 2019, I released a book called Stand Up to the Financial Services Industry. And that book talks about how mutual fund registrants in Canada have what are called misguided beliefs. They believe things that are just demonstrably untrue. And these are people that are giving advice. So on the one hand, I can complain about influencers who are not accredited giving advice. But here we have an even bigger problem where the people who are accredited are giving demonstrably bad advice. And I'm concerned about that. And yet I don't feel that I'm getting a lot of resonance. A lot of people are not really engaging with that. So a few years ago, in January of 2023, released my new book, Bullshift. And it talks about how the financial services industry shifts your attention to make you feel bullish and the role of optimism bias. And I have to say, here we are now in September of 2025. The book is 2 2/3 years old. And the things that I was concerned about when I was writing the book are still not yet happening, which is to say the market hasn't had a major drawdown, but the optimism bias as a result has become even more pronounced. People think they're bulletproof. They say, oh, well, the market just keeps on going up. I guess I can't. And I'm trying to ask people to reflect upon first principles, what they're doing in their portfolio construction, what they're doing in terms of their asset allocation, and do they have an emergency fund and whatnot to deal with what could be a difficult time ahead. No one wants to listen because the bulls are running.
Yeah.
So on the one hand, I have these two, not one, but two very important messages that I'm trying to deliver. On the other hand, I'm not getting the engagement I was hoping to get. So what advice would you give to me and to the people that are listening to the podcast about, hey, De Goey's been trying pretty hard now to get these points across. Why are they not resonating?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think you're in a very big cohort of creators that have this message that they really feel strongly about sharing that's very valuable. But the difficulty is making the emotional connection with it and explaining the relevance. My dad was an insurance broker for his entire career. And insurance is a difficult product to sell. And he always talked about people hate insurance, or there's this negative connotation towards insurance because your first experience is usually something like car insurance, right? And car insurance, which when you're, maybe you start driving in your late teens, is an insanely expensive thing that really gives you no value. So it's difficult to explain to somebody who doesn't see any value. And the only emotional thing that they experience is, I don't have a lot of money and I have to spend money on this that doesn't really give me anything. But when you fast forward, at some point, somebody has an experience with insurance that is positive. They have a loss scenario and they go, oh my God, thank God I had insurance, because if I didn't, it would have been disastrous. So I think what you're trying to do is challenging. It's like selling car insurance to an 18-year-old driver, because it's extremely valuable, but the event hasn't happened, right? So I think the way to connect with somebody is not to explain the logic behind it, right? Because I'm sure you have all sorts of sound logic behind the argument. It's to find the emotional component of it. And usually the way to do that is through storytelling. Storytelling is an extremely powerful tool where what you're trying to do is you're trying to take your viewer that you're trying to get this message through to, and you're trying to have them put themselves in that story, right? So I think that if you want to get that emotional resonance that is going to suck people into what you really want to talk about, think about the storytelling approach. Think about taking examples. Maybe it's personal examples, maybe it's client examples, maybe it's historical examples, but really find the emotional resonance that is going to grab people's attention without being clickbaity, right? Because that's not a great way to build trust. We still want to build trust, but you can draw on these things, but really try and hit the emotional opener, because that's what's going to make people stick around and listen.
Well, I guess that's an important thing. It's a wonderful segue, because tomorrow I'm going to be giving a talk at the convention center at 4:15 on Friday the 12th. And it's about bullshit, but it's also about stand-up. And I can tell you right now, the talk will be chock-a-block full of stories, because a lot of what you're telling me right now is something that I've maybe grudgingly been a bit too late to recognize, but I keep on coming at people with evidence and logic. And the fact of the matter is, people are more compelled by emotions and storytelling, and you've got to be able to resonate with that.
Yeah.
So I think we're about at the point where we have to end, unfortunately. And I always like to end with the question of, Mike, you've been around the block a few times, and the podcast is called Make Better Wealth Decisions. What advice would you give to the listeners to help them make better wealth decisions?
I think the hardest thing to do today is to figure out who to trust. Trust has always been difficult, but it's so much more difficult today because of the amount of information that we have. So I think the important thing for people to do to make better wealth decisions, or better decisions generally, is don't spend too much time trying to consume all the information. Try to understand the source of the information better. And that's the thing, that's where you're trying to find the person, you're trying to find the trust, and that will guide you to a better decision over time. It's finding that person that you can trust, because people create content and content will reach you, but find it back and see how consistent they are, how often they show up, how often their message changes, and how much they're giving away for free, because that says a lot about that person and how much they actually care about you.
Wow, that's very nice. Mike, I want to thank you for your time today. For the people that are listening, please be sure to like and subscribe if you've made it this far. We'd love to get more people listening and viewing. And Mike, again, your counsel over the years has been invaluable, and I want to thank you and wish you all the success going forward.
Thanks, John. I appreciate it.
This podcast is not to be construed as offering specific investment advice. Please consult a qualified advisor before acting. My books, Stand Up to the Financial Services Industry and Bullshift, are available online. If you'd like to meet to discuss how the topics in this podcast affect you directly, please visit my website.